In the summer of 2025, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, was buzzing with excitement. The Cassini spacecraft had sent back its last set of images from Saturn, a treasure trove of data that scientists had been eagerly anticipating. After years of orbiting the planet, the spacecraft had completed its mission, and it was time to analyze the findings. Among the thousands of images, one stood out. Dr. Alice Munro, a leading astrobiologist, was working late one evening, sifting through the images. The room was dimly lit, the flickering light from a computer screen casting shadows on the walls. The hum of machinery and the distant chatter of colleagues filled the air. As she zoomed in on one particularly interesting image of Saturn's icy moon, Enceladus, she noticed something strange in the background, a faint glimmer against the dark expanse of space. "What is that?" she muttered to herself, her heart quickening. She adjusted the contrast and brightness of the image, and what emerged was a shape. It was almost organic, swirling with an ethereal luminescence, unlike anything she had seen before. It didn't conform to any known natural phenomenon. Alice called over her colleague, Dr. Robert Hayes, a seasoned astronomer with a reputation for being skeptical. "Look at this," she said, pointing at the screen. "What do you think?" Robert squinted at the image, his brow furrowing in concentration. "It looks like a reflection or an artifact of the camera. Are you sure it's not just a glitch?" "No," Alice replied, shaking her head. "This isn't a glitch. It's too structured. I think we need to run some analysis." Together they conducted a series of tests, adjusting filters and examining various spectrums. The more they delved into the data, the more intrigued and alarmed they became. The glimmer was not only real, it had properties that suggested it was not of this world. Hours turned into days as they presented their findings to their superiors. After initial skepticism, their discoveries quickly gained attention. A special team was assembled, and a briefing was scheduled for the highest levels of NASA. The implications of their findings were staggering. The conference room was stark and cold, filled with the elite of NASA's scientific community. Alice and Robert stood before a large screen, the image of Saturn looming behind them like a celestial ghost. NASA's administrator, Dr. Elizabeth Carter, a no-nonsense woman with an impressive resume, took her seat at the head of the table. "Let's get started," she said, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of tension. "You have 15 minutes to present your findings. We need to know what we're dealing with." Alice felt a rush of nerves but steeled herself. "Thank you, Dr. Carter. What we have discovered on Saturn is unlike anything we've encountered before." As she spoke, the room grew silent, the air thick with anticipation. She described the image, the strange object's luminescence, and the results of their analysis. It was not just a reflection. It was a physical object, and preliminary spectrographic analysis suggested it was emitting its own light. Dr. Hayes chimed in. "We believe it may be a structure or possibly a biological entity. Its chemical composition doesn't match anything we've catalogued from our solar system." A murmur swept through the room. The members of the panel exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of skepticism and fascination. Dr. Carter raised a hand to silence them. "Are we talking about alien life?" Alice took a deep breath. "It's too early to conclude definitively, but we can't rule it out. We need to investigate further." Dr. Carter leaned back in her chair, deep in thought. "What do you propose?" "We recommend launching a probe to get closer," Robert suggested. "We can send it to Enceladus and perform a flyby of the object. The data we could collect would be invaluable." After a lengthy debate, the panel ultimately approved the mission. The countdown had begun, and the urgency in the room was palpable. But amidst the excitement, Alice felt a creeping unease. Weeks turned into months as NASA prepared for the mission. Engineers and scientists worked tirelessly, designing a new probe capable of withstanding the harsh conditions of space. They called it Odyssey, a name that echoed the great voyages of exploration throughout history. As the launch date approached, Alice became more and more obsessed with the implications of what they might find. She spent countless nights poring over data, staying late at the lab, her colleagues often finding her in a trance, lost in thought. She began to have strange dreams, visions of swirling lights and an entity beckoning her to join it in the depths of space. One evening, as she was reviewing the probe's final designs, her phone rang. It was Dr. Carter. "Alice, can you come to my office?" The tone of her voice set Alice on edge. She arrived to find Dr. Carter staring intently at her computer screen. "I wanted to show you something," she said, gesturing to the screen. On it was a video feed from a private observatory, showing a live view of Saturn. But something was off. A massive shadow passed over the planet, obscuring part of its rings. Alice's breath caught in her throat. "What is that?" "We don't know," Dr. Carter replied, a voice tight with anxiety. "But it's moving in a way that defies explanation. We have military contacts on alert. They're concerned." "Concerned about what?" Alice asked, her heart racing. Dr. Carter looked at her with a mixture of fear and determination. "If this object is what we think it is, we might not be the only ones interested in it." The launch day arrived with a mix of excitement and dread. The sprawling Kennedy Space Center was filled with journalists, scientists, and families, all eager to witness the moment. Alice stood with Robert and Dr. Carter as they watched the Odyssey probe prepare for liftoff. The countdown echoed through the launch complex. 10, 9, 8. The excitement was palpable, but Alice felt an unsettling weight in her stomach. What if they were disturbing something that should remain hidden? 3, 2, 1, liftoff! The ground trembled as the rocket roared to life, piercing the sky with flames and smoke, rising into the atmosphere. Alice could hardly focus on the cheers around her. Her mind was racing, contemplating the potential horrors waiting in the void. A glimmer of the object flashed through her mind. The way it twisted and turned, its otherworldly glow pulling her into its depths. As the probe soared away from Earth, Alice clung to a sense of hope. Perhaps they would uncover the truth about life beyond their world. A truth that could unite humanity. But there was also the lurking dread that they might awaken something far more sinister. The Odyssey probe traveled for months through the vastness of space. As it approached Saturn, Alice and Robert monitored the data feed, each transmission filled with awe as they watched the majestic planet come into view, its rings shimmering like a cosmic halo. The tension in the control room was palpable. Scientists whispered theories and predictions, their eyes glued to the monitors. As they entered orbit, the probe sent back images of Enceladus, its icy surface glistening under the sunlight. They could see the geysers erupting from its south pole, sending plumes of water vapor into space. "This is incredible," Robert exclaimed. "If there's life anywhere in our solar system, it's likely here." But Alice couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As they approached the strange object, the feed began to flicker, a distortion rippling across the screen. "What's happening?" Alice shouted, her heart pounding. "Signal interference," Robert replied, his voice tense. "It might be due to the object's unique electromagnetic properties." Alice watched in horror as the feed stabilized, revealing the object in all its glory. It was massive, much larger than they had anticipated, an enormous pulsating mass of energy, shifting and changing shape like a living organism. It glowed with an unsettling light, and for a moment, she felt an inexplicable pull, as if it were calling to her. Is that a structure?" she whispered, barely able to comprehend what she was seeing. "It looks organic," Robert replied, his eyes wide. "This could be a biosphere, or something even more advanced." The Odyssey probe moved closer, its instruments working overtime as they collected data. Alice and Robert were glued to their screens, watching every second unfold. Suddenly, an alarm blared in the control room. "What the hell is happening?" Dr. Carter shouted, rushing over to their station. "Power fluctuations on the probe," Robert said, frantically typing commands. "We're losing control." The probe began to spin uncontrollably, its feed becoming chaotic. Images flickered, then went dark. Come on, Alice muttered, her heart racing. After a tense few moments, the signal returned. But what they saw sent chills down their spines. The probe was surrounded by a dark mist, and the object loomed in front of it, pulsating with an ominous light. Then a voice, deep, resonant, and otherworldly, echoed through the control room. "We see you." Everyone froze, staring at the screen in shock. "What was that?" Robert whispered, eyes wide. "I don't know," Alice replied, her mind racing, "but it's trying to communicate." The voice continued, reverberating through the control room, sending shivers down their spines. "You have awakened us. You should not have come." The control room erupted into chaos. Scientists shouted instructions, but the commands fell on deaf ears. Dr. Carter slammed her fist on the table, demanding order. "Shut it down. Shut down the probe." Alice felt paralyzed, torn between the urge to flee and the desire to understand. "We can't. We need to know what it's trying to tell us." "Are you insane?" Robert shouted, fear in his eyes. "That thing could be dangerous." But Alice couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something monumental. "It's a new form of intelligence. We have to try to communicate." Dr. Carter's expression hardened. "You need to be rational, Alice. We don't know what we're dealing with." Before she could respond, the feed went black again. Panic surged through the control room as technicians scrambled to restore the connection. "We're losing telemetry," one shouted. Just then, a new image flashed across the screen. The object was gone, replaced by a swirling mass of darkness that enveloped the probe. Then, one by one, the monitors went dark, plunging the control room into chaos. "Get the backup generator online," Dr. Carter shouted. "We need to regain control." As they scrambled to restore power, Alice couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of dread. What had they awoken? What had they set in motion? Hours passed, and tension hung thick in the air. The backup systems flickered to life, but the telemetry was still unstable. The team was frantic, desperate to regain control of the Odyssey probe. Finally, the screens flickered back on, but what they saw made their blood run cold. The probe's cameras captured a nightmarish sight. The darkness had taken on form, morphing into shapes that resembled faces, twisted, anguished visages staring back at them. "What is that?" Robert breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. Alice felt a wave of nausea wash over her. "It's like they're trapped in there." Dr. Carter's expression turned grim. "This is beyond anything we've encountered. We need to abort the mission. Bring the probe back." But before they could make any decisions, the voice returned, echoing through the control room. "You cannot leave. You have entered our domain." Panic erupted as the lights flickered, and the room was plunged into darkness once more. The team scrambled for flashlights, their faces illuminated by the weak beams of light. "You will understand our pain," the voice continued, resonating in the depths of their minds. "You will join us." Alice felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. "We have to get out of here," she shouted. In the chaos, Dr. Carter ordered an emergency retreat. Scientists and engineers began shutting down the systems, frantically trying to abort the mission. But as they worked, the darkness continued to pulse around the probe, a living entity, pushing back against their commands. "Override the systems," Robert shouted. "We need to get out of here before it's too late." Alice's heart raced as she assisted Robert in executing the emergency protocols. They worked together to regain control of the probe, fingers flying over the keyboard. But the darkness was relentless, seeming to respond to their actions. The room was filled with a low hum, a vibration that resonated through their bones. "You cannot escape," the voice boomed, now filled with anger. "You are part of us now." Suddenly, the screens lit up again, revealing images of twisted landscapes filled with dark skies and pulsating lights. Alice recognized them. Visions of desolation, of anguish. "What are you showing us?" she cried, tears welling in her eyes. "This is our reality," the voice replied, "and now it is yours." In a final act of desperation, Alice slammed her palm down on the emergency button to initiate the self-destruct sequence for the probe. "We have to destroy it. Now!" But as the countdown began, the lights flickered once more, and the darkness surged forward, enveloping the control room. The team felt a powerful force pushing against them, as if the very air had turned to lead. "You will not end this," the voice roared, echoing through their minds. "You will witness the truth." The countdown timer began to glitch, numbers flickering and distorting. Panic surged through the control room as the team realized they were losing control of the probe and of their fate. Just then, the screens displayed a horrific image. Figures trapped in the darkness, clawing at the walls of a vast void. Their faces were twisted in terror, mouths open in silent screams. "What is this?" Robert gasped, staring at the images with horror. "They are the lost," the voice said, calm yet chilling. "We were once like you. We were explorers, seekers of knowledge, but we found only despair." The lights in the control room flickered, plunging them into darkness once more. Alice felt a presence closing in around her, a suffocating weight pressing against her chest. "You have chosen your path," the voice whispered, now just a breath in her ear. "Join us, or be lost forever." As the countdown reached its final seconds, the team scrambled to regain control. "Abort! Abort!" Dr. Carter shouted, but the systems were unresponsive. Alice felt a choice boiling inside her, whether to embrace the unknown or flee from it. She thought of humanity's thirst for knowledge, the drive to explore the universe. But was it worth the price? The weight of the darkness pressed against her, and she was flooded with memories of her childhood, stargazing with her father, the wonder of the cosmos. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "I refuse to join you." Suddenly, the screens exploded with light, blinding them momentarily. When Alice's vision cleared, she saw the countdown flashing 0 seconds. An enormous explosion rocked the control room, the walls shuddering under the force. Alarms blared, and the screens went dark. Alice felt herself being thrown against the wall, the world spinning around her. She could barely hear Dr. Carter shouting for everyone to evacuate, her voice swallowed by the chaos. When Alice regained consciousness, she found herself lying on the cold floor of the control room. The lights flickered weakly and smoke filled the air. She coughed, struggling to breathe as she pushed herself up. "Robert!" she shouted, scanning the wreckage. She spotted him a few feet away, unconscious but alive. "Get up!" With a surge of adrenaline, she crawled over to him and shook his shoulder. "Robert, wake up!" He stirred, blinking groggily. "What happened?" he mumbled, struggling to sit up. "The probe. It detonated," Alice said, her voice trembling. "But it's still out there. We have to get to the backup control room." Together they stumbled through the wreckage, navigating the debris. The echoes of the explosion still rang in their ears, and they could feel the weight of uncertainty pressing upon them. They reached the backup control room, where a small group of survivors was already working to assess the damage. Dr. Carter was there, her face pale but resolute. "What's the status?" Alice demanded, her heart racing. "The probe, it's gone," Dr. Carter said, her voice hoarse. "But the darkness, whatever it was, it's still out there. We need to warn Earth." As they worked to restore communication with Earth, a sense of dread settled over the team. They knew they had uncovered something dangerous, something that could not be contained. "Are we sure this thing isn't following us?" Robert asked, fear lacing his voice. Dr. Carter shook her head. "I don't know, but we need to alert everyone. The implications of this discovery could change everything." Alice's heart sank as she realized the weight of their findings. They were not just explorers. They were harbingers of a new reality, one that challenged the very essence of humanity. The communication system flickered to life and Alice rushed to the console. "This is Dr. Alice Monroe from NASA. We have critical information regarding an object discovered near Saturn. It's not just a phenomenon, it's an entity, and we may have awakened something dangerous." The response was immediate, but the voice on the other end sounded strained. "Dr. Monroe, we need more details. What do you mean by entity?" "We're still assessing the situation," Alice said, urgency flooding her voice. "But we believe it has the capability to..." Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the deep voice resonated through the control room once more. "You cannot escape. You have awakened us." The team froze, terror gripping their hearts. The screens flickered to life, displaying images of swirling darkness, filled with trapped faces, their mouths open in silent screams. "Abort the communication!" Dr. Carter shouted, panic in her eyes. "We can't let it reach Earth." The control room erupted into chaos as the voice echoed through the monitors, a haunting reminder of their failure. "You will join us or be lost forever." Alice felt a cold sweat break out across her skin. "We have to find a way to stop it," she yelled, desperation clawing at her throat. "Self-destruct the base," Robert suggested, his eyes wild with fear. "If we can't contain it here, we have to ensure it doesn't escape." Dr. Carter hesitated, weighing the risks. "We can't sacrifice everyone here. We need another way." But the voice continued to swirl around them, pressing against their minds. "You will become part of us. You cannot resist." Alice's thoughts raced as she searched for answers. They had stumbled into something they couldn't understand, a force that transcended their reality. But how could they fight it? Suddenly, a thought struck her. What if the darkness was not just a threat, but a warning? "What if it's trying to show us something?" she asked, her voice rising above the chaos. "What if it wants us to understand?" Dr. Carter frowned. "You think it's a message?" "Yes," Alice said, her heart racing. "Maybe it's trying to warn us about something even worse." As they grappled with their options, the lights flickered ominously. The voice grew louder, the resonance echoing through their minds. "You have entered our domain. You cannot leave." Alice felt a sudden surge of determination. "We have to confront it. We need to understand what it is, what it wants." "Are you crazy?" Robert shouted. "You want to communicate with it? It nearly killed us." "It might be our only chance," Alice replied, her heart pounding. "If it's a warning, we need to decipher it." With a mix of dread and courage, they returned to the main control room, where the screens flickered ominously. The darkness swirled around them, and the haunting voices echoed in their minds. Alice stepped forward, her voice trembling. "We are here to understand you. We mean no harm." The darkness pulsed, and for a moment, silence enveloped the room. Then, the voice returned, resonating in a deep, haunting tone. "You are too late." Images flashed across the screens. Destruction, chaos, worlds burning. It was a vision of annihilation, a tapestry of despair that sent chills down Alice's spine. "What is this?" Alice cried, tears streaming down her face. "What do you want us to see?" "This is your future," the voice echoed, chilling them to the core. "You will become like us." The images morphed, revealing figures once human, now twisted and trapped in the darkness. Their faces contorted in agony, silently pleading for release. Alice felt her heart race as realization dawned. This is what happens to those who seek knowledge without understanding, those who disrupt the balance of the universe. The darkness pulsed, growing brighter, suffocating her with its intensity. "You are not meant to know. You are not ready." "Then teach us," Alice shouted, her voice rising in defiance. "Show us how we can prevent this." The darkness hesitated, and for a fleeting moment the visions of despair faded. A new image emerged, one of a vast, interconnected web of light, pulsing and breathing with life. "You must choose," the voice intoned. "Join us and forsake your world, or return and heed the warnings. The choice is yours." Alice's heart pounded in her chest. They had the power to change the course of humanity, to prevent the impending doom. "We choose to return," she said, her voice steady. "We will warn the others. We will find a way to stop this." The darkness writhed, pulsing around them. The air grew thick with energy, and the room began to shake. "Your choice has been made," the voice reverberated. "But know this, the truth is not easily forgotten." In a blinding flash of light, the control room was engulfed, and Alice felt herself being pulled through a vortex of swirling colours and sounds. The darkness dissolved around her, replaced by a rush of bright light. Suddenly, Alice gasped, awakening on the floor of the control room. The air filled with the sounds of alarms and chaos. "We're back," Robert exclaimed, looking around in disbelief. But something was different. A sense of unease lingered in the air, an echo of the darkness that had enveloped them. Alice felt a shiver run down her spine. They had returned, but the truth weighed heavily on her heart. "Dr. Carter!" Alice shouted, scanning the room. "We need to get to Earth and warn them." Dr. Carter emerged from a nearby corridor, her face pale but determined. "We need to regroup and assess the situation," she said, her voice steady. "We can't let anyone know what we've seen." "But we have to warn them," Alice insisted, desperation clawing at her throat. Dr. Carter's gaze hardened. "If we reveal what we've discovered, the panic could be catastrophic. We need to be strategic." Alice felt a sense of betrayal. "You can't be serious. Lives are at stake." Dr. Carter's expression softened. "I understand your concern, Alice, but the world isn't ready for this truth. We need to handle this delicately." As they worked to restore communications with Earth, Alice felt the weight of their decision pressing down on her. They had glimpsed the horrors lurking in the void, but the world would remain oblivious. Days turned into weeks as they plotted their next move, but Alice couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The darkness had not truly disappeared. It lingered at the edges of her mind, a constant reminder of the choice they had made. One evening, while alone in the lab, Alice reviewed the data they had collected. She pored over the images of the darkness, the twisted faces staring back at her. They were trapped, just as the voice had warned. Suddenly, she felt a cold breeze sweep through the room, and the lights flickered ominously. The voice returned, low and haunting. "You cannot escape the truth." Panic surged through her as she looked around, searching for the source. "Leave me alone!" she shouted, but the darkness only grew closer, wrapping around her like a suffocating shroud. "You made your choice," it whispered, echoing in her mind, "and now you will face the consequences." Alice stumbled backward, her heart racing. The images flooded her mind again. Worlds burning, people screaming. It was a vision of despair that seemed to seep into her very soul. "No, I refuse to believe this," she cried, clenching her fists. "We can change our fate." The voice laughed, a sound that sent chills down her spine. "You are but a speck in the vastness of the universe. Your choices are insignificant." Desperation clawed at her as she fought against the darkness closing in. "I will find a way. I will expose the truth." But the voice only grew louder, drowning out her thoughts. "You will never escape. You are already part of us." Suddenly, a blinding light filled the room, and Alice felt herself being pulled again, spiraling through a vortex of colours and sounds. She gasped, trying to hold on to her sanity, as the darkness twisted and writhed around her. When the light faded, Alice found herself in a vast, desolate landscape, surrounded by the twisted faces she had seen before. They reached out, their mouths moving in silent screams, their eyes filled with terror. "Help us!" they cried, though no sound escaped their lips. Alice felt a surge of anger and sorrow. "What happened to you?" she shouted, tears streaming down her face. "We sought knowledge just as you do," one figure whispered, its voice echoing in her mind. "But we were consumed by the darkness." Alice's heart raced as she realized the truth. They had become trapped, their souls bound to the entity. "I won't let this happen to me," she cried, determination coursing through her veins. With a newfound strength, she reached deep within herself, pushing against the darkness that sought to consume her. "I refuse to be a pawn in this game," she shouted, a voice echoing across the desolation. The darkness roared in anger, swirling violently around her. "You cannot resist." But Alice stood firm, focusing on the light that had guided her throughout her journey. "I choose hope. I choose to fight." The landscape began to shimmer, the darkness retreating before her light. The faces around her began to fade, their screams turning into whispers of gratitude. "You have chosen wisely," the voice echoed, filled with both rage and despair. "But know this, the truth will always find a way to return." With a final surge of light, Alice found herself back in the control room, gasping for breath. The darkness had receded, but its remnants lingered at the edges of her mind. "We have to warn them," she shouted, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "We have to expose the truth." Dr. Carter and Robert rushed to her side, their faces pale with fear. "What happened?" Dr. Carter asked, urgency in her voice. "The darkness. It's not gone. It will always return unless we warn the world," Alice said, determination blazing in her eyes. "We have to make them understand the risks of exploring the unknown." Together they worked to compile their findings, gathering the evidence they had collected. They would reveal the truth, the dangers lurking in the depths of space. But as they prepared to communicate with Earth, Alice felt a sense of unease creeping in. The darkness may have receded, but it had left its mark. The truth was not easily forgotten, and the entity would always be waiting in the shadows. Days passed, and they finally transmitted their findings to Earth, hoping to prevent the impending doom. But as they awaited a response, Alice couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. One night, as she stared at the stars from the observatory, she felt a familiar chill in the air. The voice echoed softly in her mind. "You have chosen to fight, but the cycle of knowledge never ends." Tears filled Alice's eyes as she gazed at the cosmos. They had uncovered the truth, but at what cost? The darkness would always linger, a constant reminder of the price of knowledge. But she wouldn't give in. They had fought against the void, and she would continue to fight for understanding. As she watched the stars twinkle in the night sky, Alice realized their journey was just beginning. They would explore the unknown, but with caution, carrying the weight of their discoveries. And she vowed that one day they would share the truth with the world, illuminating the shadows that threatened to engulf them.